All right, we're going to go ahead and get started. We're good on that. Perfect. All right, I'm going to go ahead and call to order this meeting of the Assembly Quality Municipal Services and Ethics and Elections Committee. We are noticed today, Wednesday, March 26th, from 1 to 2 p.m. here at City Hall, room 155. Let's go ahead and start with Assembly member introductions, starting with Member Braga.
Karen Bronga.
Zach Johnson.
Felix Rivera. And then on the phone, we have Member Myers.
Yes, thank you, Chair.
Member Littlefield.
Thank you, Chair.
Great. And Member Brawley.
Hello, I'm here.
Great. I do just want to note for the record, because I do have us possibly taking a vote today, that we do have quorum. And I want to note for the record that we've been joined by Member Constant. All right. So we just have 2 items on the agenda today. So we might be done relatively quickly. We'll see. So we'll start with first item under new business, committee referral of AO 2025-18, a ballot proposition amending the home rule charter to update the charter texts with corrections for grammar and legal rulings. So at the last committee meeting, we talked about this particular ordinance and what we wanted to do. I took the liberty to craft 4 different recommendations. So I'm going to walk through the recommendations. I want to invite discussion on these recommendations before we take a motion and vote on one of these recommendations. My goal is to get to a vote on one of these recommendations today. If we're not ready to do that today, that's also perfectly acceptable. Okay, so these 4 recommendations, pretty simple. First one is deal with it now. So we would recommend to the Assembly approval of the AO and placing it on the April 7th, 2026 ballot. Second recommendation is deal with it closer to the 2026 election. So postpone action on the AO and possibly even refer it to this committee again to look at it in November. Third recommendation is the creation of a charter review commission. So that recommendation looks like indefinite postponement of the AO with a recommendation that the Assembly consider a charter review commission. Everything after that sentence is just an explanatory comma to add some more context that would not be included in whatever recommendation this body makes. It's just additional context and information. Recommendation 4 would be to not move forward with any charter changes, so indefinite postponement of the AO with no further recommendation. So I think those are the 4 possible scenarios for us to consider. Any discussion on those different recommendations? Yeah, go ahead, Member Johnson.
Yeah, thanks. I'll just say I kind of like recommendation number 3. It feels like, you lay out a good list of things that are merit consideration. And as I recall from our last meeting, it feels like it's been a while since anybody's really looked at the charter. I also like the idea of kind of making it a less political exercise, using the commission as a mechanism to craft it. So that's sort of, I would say that would be my personal preference at this point.
Thank you. Member Brawley?
Yeah, thank you. I am open to that commission, and I'm thinking back to the prior conversation we had about this. I guess in terms of recommendations, I do like the idea of not just postponing this indefinitely, that we keep working on it. I'm open to the idea of a commission. I do worry about the time frame of that, and then I would want to have a balance of kind of outside folks who can bring that perspective, the community perspective, but also folks with experience in the municipality, so whether it's current or former, just because we don't want to go too far down the road and then discover, oh, this conflicts with some other, critical piece. So I'm not necessarily sold on number 3, because I guess I would just want to know what would be the intended time frame for that, especially standing it up and then getting recommendations with plenty of time for January, which would be our deadline to put it on the ballot. So I guess that's my question, but I'm definitely interested in this continuing.
Yeah, thank you, Member Brawley. So I think the recommendation specific to the Assembly is going to be fairly simple. It's going to be The Equality, Municipal Services, and Ethics and Elections Committee recommends indefinite postponement of AO 2025-18 with a recommendation that the Assembly consider a charter review commission, period. So it leaves really the question of when the charter review commission would be seated, who would be seated, qualifications, sunset dates, all of those particulars. It leaves those to further discussion. I didn't really see it as my purview to make all of those decisions in a recommendation for this committee, since we really haven't had that discussion. And I think the larger body would probably be very interested in this discussion if this is the recommendation that goes forward.
Yeah, thanks. And if I could just make a quick follow-up comment and question too, I think the other question would be, is this commission purely coming out of the Assembly? Would it be a joint project with the Assembly and the mayor? And I understand that some of those things would need to be discussed at the next step, but just wondering, is this something that we own? Because I think Member Johnson's point about the political aspect of it, right? Who's owning this? I think that's worth considering as well, even in our initial recommendations. Thanks.
Thanks. Yeah, and I'll just be transparent and say that I have not had conversations with the administration about ownership of such a commission, but certainly I think that would be a conversation to have. Any other? Oh yes, Member Braga.
Thank you. When I read through this AO 2025-18, I really thought I was reading that it was just text corrections, grammar corrections, but looking at this list, it seems like a lot more. And so I think recommendation 3, in my opinion, is the best bet. Thank you.
Thank you. Member Constant?
Just a little clarification. I think, Anna, your point, that bullet that is number 3, it talks about in line with Title 4. And so that would be a commission that's established by us, but proposed membership by the administration and generally led by the administration. We would, depending on how we craft it, participate in some way, but ultimately it reads to me, at least as it is on paper right now, that this is just like any of our other commissions. It would run through Title 4, which is an executive function.
Thanks. Mr. Gates?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair. I just wanted to comment on recommendation 1 and 3 briefly. I absolutely don't recommend going with recommendation 1. It doesn't sound like anybody's interested in that right now, mostly because I think this AO needs a little more vetting. And I will say that several of the recommendations for charter changes were mine, and a couple of them I think you may be called borderline housekeeping. They maybe have a little more effect than just housekeeping. So I want that vetted a little more than just acting on it as soon as April 7th. I'm sorry, or as soon as its next meeting date. I'm sorry, which day is the ordinance up for next on regular agenda?
Yeah, so this was an interesting one. Thank you, Mr. Gates. So this one was whenever we make a recommendation is when it will be back before the Assembly, which is not something we have ever done. But okay. So if we make a recommendation today, then it'll be back before the Assembly, the next agenda.
Okay, and then I was going to speak to the recommendation 3 here, and I believe Mr. Rivera, you asked him to research a charter commission establishment and process to do so a few years ago. And I did some, but now I haven't. I mean, I'm a little hazy. My memory is a little vague, but I'm looking at the statute that governs adopting a municipal charter, and I think that generally it's AS 29-10-10, a D and E. And it starts the proposed charter for an existing municipality is prepared by a charter commission of 7 elected members. And so I think that I'd make a recommendation today with an outline of the research you asked me to do, because I believe the charter commission is owned by the electorate of the municipality and not by the administration or the assembly. I mean, the charter is the voters, and so it might be an election to the elect commission members.
Yeah.
area wide. So I mean, I would recommend at least putting that off a little bit.
Yeah, thanks, Mr. Gates. So at the last committee meeting, we actually talked a little bit about this and the difference between a charter commission and a charter review commission. And it's my opinion, based on the research, I'm no attorney though, that a charter review commission is one that would fit under Title IV. And in fact, the last charter review commission was created in 1990, in which it was a Title IV boards and commission that was temporary and then eventually sunsetted. So certainly I'm very much not interested in a charter commission because we already did that. We don't need to do that again. Member Constant.
I was gonna reiterate
Thanks for the
what
clarification.
what you just said. The word review is very important. It would produce to the assembly a slate of proposed possible amendments to the charter. It would not propose to the voters a charter alternative. And so that's the structure that I think was discussed. So as kind of parallel to what Mr. Rivera said, this is a somewhat different process.
Thank you. All right. Seeing no other discussion. So for this next part, I appreciate members Myers and Littlefield being here, but this next part will just be for committee members. So can I get a motion on one of the recommendations? Or actually, and I just want to pause. I do want to respect that Mr. Gates stated that we should possibly wait another month. But what I'm going to recommend, if we move with recommendation number 3, is that the specific recommendation will simply be that first sentence. The rest of that under recommendation number 3 is just an explanatory comma for the purpose of this committee only, will not go into any recommendation we send to the assembly. So is there any recommendation?
Move recommendation 3.
Second.
Okay. Moved and seconded. Member Constant?
Yeah, I am not confident that these are the answer. I think I am more supportive at this time of recommendation 4 with more study internally through this committee. And so I understand the value and the interest in the review, and I don't know that it's necessarily a bad thing, but I am often hesitant on asking questions I'm not quite sure of the answer we're going to get back. And so for my part, I'm just going to probably be a no on the recommendation.
Thank you. Yes, Member Johnson?
I guess being mindful of Member Constance's comments here, I mean, I don't mind taking more time with it. I guess sort of my question would be like, what do we want to dig into if we give ourselves more time? I'm not sure I feel like a great deal of urgency. So if there's a better path, that leads us to this conclusion, then I don't mind taking it, and I'd be willing to withdraw the recommendation if I.
That was a question for me.
Mhm.
I just, the list that's here, even though Mr. Rivera says, don't look at the list. It's everything above the list. The list it just like makes me think of all the potential rabbit holes. And what I think we ought to do is take this list and keep an ongoing, work with the department of our legal department to start generating a category of lists of these things in an ongoing way, areas that we think are problematic. I just am very hesitant to play with the charter in any way. It's very serious. And so that's my feeling is it's a grave conversation to be raising this up because it could get a life of its own. And so I think more kind of work on what are these areas is where I would spend my time, as opposed to let's send forward a group of people to start, mining for ideas for changes that we should make. I don't know. It's just a subtle kind of philosophical.
Sure. I'm going to go ahead and interject at this point. Yeah, I appreciate where Member Constant's coming from. I think for me, the way that I see recommendation number 3, if that is the recommendation that the majority of this committee wants to make, is that it really is a multi-step process. So recommendation number 3 is we are interested in exploring the creation of a charter review commission. Then where does that happen? Does that happen in this committee where we explore the creation of a charter review commission? Does that happen in the rules committee? Where does that work happen? And then it's up to that body that controls the work to eventually go through. And to be fully transparent, the reason that I made this list is because people asked me for the list, right? To go through and say, this is the list that we want to eventually send to a charter review commission. And so I envision that some of the work that you're talking about, Member Concept, could happen in that process, in that sort of step 2 before step 3, which is the creation of the Charter Review Commission, where we say, here is what we want you to look at. We've explored these areas. Charter Review Commission, now go ahead and do your work. But I can understand why that is a sensitive subject, because it does take it out of our control in the end, or at least for the public process of coming up with the recommendations. And then we either have to, in the end, step 4, say yes to the recommendations or no to the recommendations, or parse it out in some way in between. So that's how I envision this process working. 4 steps: creation of the commission, or excuse me, approval of the recommendation, discussion around what we want the commission to do, creation of the commission, and the commission does its work, and then the assembly eventually says yes or no to the recommendations, or something in between. All right, seeing no further discussion, then can you go ahead and call the roll, please?
Oh, sorry, Mr. Chair, I was in the queue.
Oh, yes, go ahead, Member Brawley.
Yeah, sorry. I guess 2 questions I have, because I'm also, I hear kind of multiple sides of this, and I understand that this is really be taking. I think my question is it more important for us to, these are my 2 questions. Is it more important for us to be driving toward a specific date, mentioned the April 2026 ballot? Because that puts a firm kind of time frame on it, which means there's got to be more, I guess, more either accelerated action or just kind of hitting certain milestones, right? So is it an open-ended or closed-ended process? And then also with the list, that's really the question. Are we inviting others, other kind of changes to be considered, or is it really like, here's the, is it a closed or open list? And I know both of those we can't answer right now, but I think that would drive both the timeline and how we prioritize, the pace, or I should say the pace at which we move, and then how open of an aperture we have with this. Because I think if it's truly a cleanup, that's a much tighter process on a tighter timeline with less kind of open-ended discussion. But if we want to have a kind of more open-ended discussion, or open it up to others, putting things on the list to consider, that's going to be a longer time frame. So I don't have a good sense of where folks are at on that. I just want to put that out there from kind of a project management perspective.
Thank you. Yeah, and actually, I can reply to both, but I'll just reply to the former question on timeline. So the recommendations, I crafted them in a way that the only one that has a specific timeline is recommendation number 1. Recommendation numbers 2, 3, and 4, I did not purposefully put timelines in them. Well, no, never mind. I did put a recommendation for number 2, at least a timeline for when we want to postpone it. Number 3 and 4, though, no timelines in them on purpose, because it may take us longer to do the work in it, or it may not. I don't want us to be expeditious in the work. I do want us to be thoughtful in the work. So to answer your question more specifically, this could be an April 2026 question, or it could be an April 2027 question, or it could be a even more in the future question. Thanks.
Okay, then I'll just briefly say, if there's no specific time frame attached to that recommendation, that makes me more comfortable with it.
All right, seeing no further discussion, now go ahead.
On the motion to move recommendation number 3, Chair Rivera,
Yes.
Vice Chair Constant,
Oh, no.
Member Johnson,
Yes.
Member Bronga,
Yes.
and Member Brawley.
Yes.
That vote passes 4-1.
Thank you, and I'll make sure that the record reflects that when this comes back to the assembly. So I guess I will ask the clerk if through your internal processes, so the way that we did this was, this will come back to the assembly when we come up with the recommendation. And so we voted on a recommendation. So if you can just make sure through your internal process that this does come back up to the assembly. I'm not picky. It could be April 8th, but I know that that agenda is super full already. So maybe wait for another future meeting, but whenever it is, sometime in the near future. Okay, great. Thank you. Thank you for that discussion. I really appreciate it. So second item, introductory conversation on RCV, ranked choice voting. So I just want to highlight the introductory part of that. So little spiel from me, and then happy to open it up. So as I stated previously, I'm hoping that in May, maybe June timeframe, depending on how things go, I really do want to robustly begin, continue, however you want to phrase it, the conversation around ranked choice voting, and within this committee as it relates to our ethics and elections part. And I want to really kickstart that process in a strong way whenever we do officially begin it in May or June in this committee. So I would just wanted to talk really baby steps of what we would want that process to look like. Is there a product that we would be looking at? Would we be having a more foundational and theoretical discussion? And I will just give a little bit of my initial thoughts. So for my part, I am more interested in the how discussion and less interested in the why discussion. We've, I think, already as a state have had the why discussion a couple of times, right? We might even be having it a third time relatively soon. But the voters have made their intention known on the why. So I personally don't see a need to expend a lot of our process time on the why. Certainly, I think a lot of the work will be in the how. We adapt our local election to become a ranked choice voting election. I do envision that this committee would be the appropriate venue to have those how discussions. And I want to make sure that we bring in the appropriate stakeholders to the table to have that discussion. I wasn't at the table when the vote by mail system was set up, but I do know that that was a very robust process with many, many different stakeholders at the table, and that the Ethics and Elections Committee was one of several venues that had the discussion. I don't necessarily know if it needs to be as robust of a process as the vote by mail, which was a multi-year process, but certainly I think it will require a robust process. Would love to get a sense of as the chair of the committee, begin formulating what a process might look like in this committee, what kind of timeline that we're looking at here, because this will eventually need to go to the voters, right? So are we looking at an April 2026 timeline, or are we looking at a further timeline than that? Or are we looking at something else? I don't know. So those are some of the introductory conversations that I wanted to have today that helps me as the chair formulate what a process might look like. Go ahead, Member Constant.
So I have a draft AO that establishes a voter charter amendment to establish ranked choice voting that is nearly ready for prime time. And so I don't feel like too far out in the future is the starting point. In fact, it might be very soon. The starting point of this conversation in specific, not just in the abstract. And so with the intent to see the question before the voters in April of 2026. It's being reviewed by the 7th floor and some other parties right now.
Thank you. Did I see your hand raised, Member Dodson? Oh, okay. Member Brawley.
Yeah, thanks. I'm definitely interested in this conversation. I think there's a lot of benefits. I know that's really speaking to the why. I think, and I wasn't around other than being a voter when the vote by mail was put in place. I think what would be helpful, at least for me, is just a baseline understanding of what would need to happen and kind of mapping that out. Because as I understand it, the changing the mayor's race would require a charter change. I have heard changing assembly races doesn't, but it seems like we shouldn't do it piecemeal, in my opinion. Like we should decide if we're going to do that or not, and think about kind of the voter education part of that as well. So anyway, all that to say, I think not that it would have to slow down. I think that would be a good goal to put this on the 2026 ballot, but I would want to start with kind of understanding what the path would be, what the how is, and then maybe what some of the major decisions points would be, or things like that. Like if that could be kind of mapped out, I think that would be helpful, because for those of us showing up, not having been in that conversation for years, I would just want to be more comfortable with kind of what needs to happen and what the options would be if there are some. So that's where I'm sitting right now. Thanks.
Thanks. All right. Okay, so yeah, this is very helpful for me, knowing that there is a vehicle in place to drive the discussion. That's always helpful. Otherwise, it does tend to be theoretical and maybe a little bit slow. But now it sounds like a lot of the work has already been done. It is, sure, go ahead.
It does tackle both assembly races and the mayor's race, school board races, all of it. And it sets up an instant runoff framework. And it does change timelines in relationship to the mayoral race, because the mayoral race has specific timelines relative to runoffs. And it changes from 45% the margin of victory to 50%, because in the ranked choice environment, it just makes sense. And so functionally speaking, it's pretty straightforward, and it's across the board. And again, once it's reviewed, members will have the opportunity to see it soon.
Great. Yeah, if you can just let me know when you're ready to see it in the committee, we can go ahead and do that. I guess since you are going to be, is it, if I can ask, and if you're prepared to say, are there other sponsors, or is it just you as the prime sponsor?
So right now, my name is the only one on it, but a lot of people have worked on it. Meg was one who's done some kind of background work on it, but she kind of handed it off to me, recognizing her timelines. And so right now, there's myself and Meg are in the conversation.
Okay, and I don't ask that because I want to be in the conversation. You all are doing the work. I asked that just to get a sense of process, who I should work with.
You were already mentioned in the email conversation, so beware.
Okay, great. All right, then you might see this on an agenda sometime soon, so that we can start that conversation. Any other discussion on that? Okay, so
Jessica, your boss has put you on the spot to offer, if you would like to come and provide, if the chair will abide, just a briefing on the new federal executive order on elections and what it might have to do with the muni.
Good afternoon, Jessica Willoughby. I'm an assistant municipal attorney. Right, so the clerk's office brought to our attention the executive order that was issued this past week by the president. As an executive order, it is applicable, and the language within the executive order is specific to federal elections. There's a few common themes that have come up previously that are reiterated within the executive order that we will keep our eye on, specifically the counting of ballots and the implications of citizenship status at voter registration. But again, the language is very specific to federal elections. So we expect there might be some impact at the state level because of the simultaneous nature of state and federal elections. But we don't anticipate any impact on this election, and we will keep our eyes open as to the impact to state elections.
great, thank you.
Yeah.
All right. I appreciate that update.
No problem.
All right. I guess I'll just open it up. Are there any departments that have departmental updates that they would like to give? If so, I invite you all to do that now. All right. Not seeing any. Then we can go ahead and adjourn early. Oh, actually, I should do audience participation. Yes, go ahead, Member Bronco.
I don't know if you can fill us in on, but I was very curious about the elections director change and if we've got that all covered. It seems a little unusual.
So I did have a quick conversation with Jamie, municipal clerk. So that's not going to speak to the personnel issue, but to the election issue. Jamie has assured me that there will be no issues with the integrity of our election, that they're just moving pieces around to make sure all the responsibilities are fulfilled.
Thanks so much.
Specifically.
Yeah.
So the effect of the change is that Jamie will take over operation of the elections directly and then is naming Jasmine and I think someone else as acting clerk for the interim while she is down at the election center ensuring the fidelity of the election. And so there is no loss down at the election center. It's stronger because the clerk is staffing it directly and the clerk's office will see some shift for the interim.
Thank you. Good question. All right. We'll go ahead and move on to audience participation. Would any members of the public like to participate? Do we have anyone on the phone? Okay. All right. With that, unless there's anything else, not seeing any, we are adjourned. Thanks, everyone.